So let me ask you, for youth ministers who are really, listen to your lecture on fire about kind of what you had to say, and they're like, what do I need to do in order to cultivate agency in the young people I work with? What advice would you give? What strategies, what practices would you suggest for them?
One thing I would suggest is political education. Political education is a very important part of social movements, but it also should be a very important part of the church, particularly for in youth ministry. You can't act on things you aren't aware of. And so when I was a youth pastor during seminary, one thing that we did was, one, we were learning about mass incarceration. So we were reading the New Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, alongside the Bible. And comparing the sort of stories in the two. But we also had the young folks writing letters to incarcerated young people at Union County Juvenile Detention Center. There were young people who couldn't come to our church because they were locked up right down the street. And so making that awareness and then connecting that awareness to an action is something that can happen in the church. And there's, I think, a theological obligation to be aware. We're sort of to be aware of what's happening in the world, not just in the United States, but across the world. And connecting that action, that awareness to some sort of action, I think is really important.
And the other stuff for me, just practically, I always remind youth workers that they need to go to where young people are being active, to learn with, to follow them into the places where they're drawn by either their passions or their hurts. And to when you're in those spaces, you learn with them and you learn from them what's going on. And then you can figure out, well, what are the resources that we as adults have that will help further the work that they're already doing and how we can walk alongside of that work. And other practical things of simply listening and not assuming that we know what's going on or that we're coming with an agenda, but to actually, I'd like to call it radical listening, like this idea of really listening without agendas, but listening, in the words of Neil Morton, to really hear people into speech. And so to do that kind of work with young people is how we cultivate their agency, how we remind them that they are capable, that they're capable of acting, that they are capable of experiencing joy.